It was one of those summer nights when music didn't just echo. It lived. The air trembled with the rhythm of Radio Gaga, hands clapping in perfect unison, 70,000 hearts beating as one. On that vast stage stood Freddie Mercury, radiant, untouchable, every inch the legend the world adored. Yet that night, something would remind everyone that beneath the sequins and thunder there was a man whose greatest gift wasn't his voice. It was his heart. Amid the floodlights and smoke, a sudden ripple passed through the crowd. From the sea of waving arms, a tiny figure broke free. A little girl, no older than 7, clutching a small handmade poster. She ducked past a guard, her eyes fixed only on Freddie. For her, he wasn't a superstar. He was a miracle she'd waited her short life to see, the audience gasped. Security moved instantly. But before anyone could react, Freddie saw her. The world's loudest concert suddenly froze into silence. What happened next would be remembered not for sound, but for stillness, for the simple act of one man choosing compassion over protocol. Humanity over fame. This is that story. The night when a child ran toward a dream and Freddie Mercury met her halfway. A moment where the noise of the world faded and all that remained was love. The night was alive with electricity. Wembley Stadium pulsed like a living creature, lights dancing, hands swaying, voices roaring the lyrics of "We Will Rock You." It was more than a concert. It was communion. Freddie Mercury commanded the stage like a celestial being, every flick of his wrist sending a tidal wave of energy through the sea of faces. The crowd belonged to him, every heartbeat moving in rhythm with his. And yet, in the middle of that perfect symphony of sound and light, something unexpected began to unfold. From the far left side of the audience, near the barrier where the lights barely reached, a small commotion stirred. A tiny figure had slipped under the metal rail, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a faded yellow dress that fluttered like a candle flame in the wind. She was running, weaving through legs and cables, her little hands clutching a crumpled sign that read in colorful letters, "I love you, Freddie." The crowd's cheers began to shift into a confused murmur. Security spotted her and rushed forward. But she kept going, straight toward the man on stage. Freddie's voice faltered mid-line. His eyes, hidden behind a shimmer of stage light, locked onto the tiny silhouette sprinting toward him. The band continued playing for a few beats longer until Brian May noticed Freddie's gaze and stopped. One by one, the instruments fell silent. The massive wave of music collapsed into an ocean of stillness. For a few surreal seconds, 70,000 people watched the impossible, a little girl defying every rule of the night, and a legend frozen in surprise. A guard reached her first, kneeling to block her path. She tried to slip past him, her small arms waving desperately toward the stage. The audience began to shout, some cheering her bravery, others gasping in disbelief. Then Freddie took a single step forward. He raised his hand gently, palm open toward security, a silent command that needed no words. The men froze. The child stopped. And in that exact instant, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Freddie stood still for a heartbeat, the microphone resting against his lips, his eyes fixed on the tiny girl before him. The stadium lights blazed, but somehow all their brilliance seemed to fade in comparison to that small, trembling figure below the stage. She couldn't have been more than 7, her cheeks flushed from the run, her eyes wide, her chest rising and falling with anxious excitement. For a moment, it felt as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them. The rock legend, and the child who had crossed the line between dream and reality. He slowly lowered the microphone, his iconic grin softening into something tender. "Hey, darling," he said, his voice calm but filled with warmth. The words didn't travel far over the speakers, but those near the front could hear, and they would remember them for the rest of their lives. The crowd, once a roaring sea, now stood in reverent silence. No one dared to move. No one wanted to break the spell. Freddie took a step closer to the edge of the stage, kneeling just slightly. His eyes never leaving hers, the security guards hesitated, unsure what to do. One of them gestured to Freddie, waiting for his signal to escort the girl away. But Freddie shook his head gently, waving them back. "It's all right," he mouthed, his eyes gleaming under the golden glow of the spotlight. The little girl looked up at him, frozen between fear and awe, holding her poster so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She whispered something. Maybe his name, maybe a thank you. No one could tell. But Freddie understood. He smiled and extended his hand toward her, palm open, inviting her to come closer. As she took a hesitant step forward, the crowd exhaled as one. The silence broke into a wave of soft applause, like rain tapping on rooftops. It wasn't wild cheering. It was gentle, respectful, almost sacred. Freddie's expression shifted. No longer the larger-than-life performer, but a man touched to his core by innocence. For a moment, the flamboyant showman vanished, replaced by the quiet soul of Farrokh Bulsara, a man who knew what it felt like to reach for something beyond your grasp and be seen. It was July 12th, 1986, one of the final nights of Queen's legendary Magic Tour. The venue, Wembley Stadium, London. The air was thick with heat and history. Flags waved, camera flashes burst like stars, and the echo of anticipation filled every corner. For Freddie, it was more than just another concert. It was a battlefield of emotion. Behind the dazzling costumes and the thunder of applause, he was carrying a secret only a few knew. His body was growing weaker, though his spirit refused to yield. That night, every note he sang was both a celebration and a farewell whispered between the lines. The band had already been on stage for over an hour. Freddie had danced, joked, and soared across octaves as if time itself obeyed him. But even amid the spectacle, he was deeply present. He had always said that the stage was the one place where he felt completely free, a space where judgment dissolved and only truth remained. The connection he shared with his audience that night was almost spiritual. Every gesture, every pause, every flick of his wrist carried meaning. And that's why, when he saw the little girl run toward him, something inside him shifted to the people in the stands. It might have looked like a sweet interruption, a child lost in a sea of adults. But to Freddie, it was something far more profound. It was innocence finding its way to light. In a world that had already begun to judge him for who he was, for how he lived, here was a child who saw none of that. She saw Freddie the dream, not Freddie the controversy. And in that moment, he felt seen in the purest way imaginable. As he watched her standing below the stage, clutching that handmade poster with trembling hands, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. He remembered being a little boy in Zanzibar, drawing music notes in the sand, dreaming of a stage he thought he'd never reach. Now, decades later, that dream had come full circle. A child's courage had turned the greatest show on earth into something deeply human. For the first time that night, the music stopped. And yet, it felt like the purest song he'd ever heard. Her name was Lily. She'd come to the concert with her father, who had saved for months just to afford 2 seats far in the back. Her mother couldn't come. She was ill, recovering at home. But she had pressed a paper ticket into Lily's hand that morning and whispered, "Sing with him for me." For weeks, Lily had begged to see Freddie Mercury, the man whose voice filled their small apartment with life, even on the hardest days. She'd memorized every lyric, every flourish, every grin he gave the crowd through the flicker of old television recordings. That night, she wasn't just a fan. She was a little girl on a mission. When the lights exploded and Freddie appeared in his white tank top and crown, Lily's heart almost burst. Every song felt like it was meant for her. Somebody to love, I want to break free, we are the champions. Each one was a promise that life could still be beautiful, even when it hurt. Her father had lifted her onto his shoulders for a better view, but she wanted more. She wanted Freddie to know that somewhere in that enormous crowd was a little girl who believed in him with all her heart. That's why she made the poster. In clumsy letters colored with crayons, she wrote, "Thank you, Freddie, you made Mum smile again." When the crowd surged and the beat shook the ground, she saw her chance. A small gap between two guards, a quick slip under the rail, and then she was running. Her father shouted her name, terrified, but Lily didn't hear. She only saw Freddie, glowing beneath the lights, larger than life, and yet somehow close enough to touch. For a 7-year-old heart, that was all that mattered. As she reached the edge of the stage, her courage began to fade. The world suddenly seemed too big, too bright. She stopped, trembling, clutching the sign that had started it all. For a second, she almost turned back, until she saw him looking right at her. Freddie's eyes were kind, curious, and alive with something she didn't expect: recognition. He didn't see a stranger. He saw someone who understood the language of the heart. And with that, Lily took one more brave step forward into the light. Freddie moved toward the edge of the stage, each step slow and deliberate, as if guided by something greater than the music itself. The crowd was utterly still. No cheers, no chants, only the hum of anticipation vibrating through the night air. Then, before anyone could comprehend what he was doing, Freddie did something that none of his fans, nor even his bandmates, had ever seen before. He lowered the microphone stand, stepped down from the stage riser, and knelt. It was a gesture so unexpected, so intimate, that it rippled through the entire stadium. The light softened, casting a gentle gold halo over the two figures, the rock legend and the little girl in yellow. The security guards froze, unsure whether to interfere, but Freddie's quiet authority held them back. He smiled, that unmistakable smile that always seemed to hide 1,000 emotions, and reached out his hand. Lily hesitated only a second before placing her tiny fingers in his. Her hand barely filled his palm. "Hello, my darling," he said, his voice trembling just enough to betray the emotion he tried to mask. The audience couldn't hear the words clearly, but they could feel them. A wave of warmth spread through the crowd. Some people began to cry. Cameras clicked, flashes burst, yet the moment felt untouchable, sacred, almost divine. Freddie brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face, his rings glinting under the lights, and whispered something that made her smile. Then he did what no one expected. He lifted her gently into his arms and brought her onto the stage. The crowd erupted, not in a wild scream, but in a deep human applause that came from the soul. He set her down beside him, holding the microphone between them. The band, sensing something extraordinary, began to play the soft intro of "Love of My Life." Freddie didn't sing to the audience this time. He sang to her. Each word, each note was a lullaby wrapped in gratitude, a message to every heart watching, that love, in its purest form, is the truest music of all. As he sang the final line, "Bring it back, bring it back, don't take it away from me," he placed his hand over his chest and looked into Lily's eyes. The meaning was unmistakable. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a prayer, a confession, a gift. And in that moment, the man who had commanded the world's biggest stages found peace in the smallest act of kindness. As the soft notes of "Love of My Life" drifted through the stadium, a kind of reverent hush descended over the sea of faces. The crowd that had once shaken the earth with its cheers now stood motionless, their tears catching the glow of the stage lights. Freddie's voice carried through the air like a prayer, warm, trembling, alive. Lily, standing beside him, looked up in wonder. She didn't sing. She simply listened, clutching her crumpled poster close to her chest as if it were part of the melody itself. For her, this wasn't a concert anymore. It was a dream, unfolding in real time. Freddie turned toward her as he sang, kneeling once again so that their eyes met on the same level. Every line was softer than the one before, as though he were afraid to break the fragile beauty of the moment. When he reached the chorus, he held the microphone near her lips, inviting her to join him. The little girl shook her head shyly, but Freddie just smiled and nodded, encouraging her. A single note escaped her, quiet and pure. It wasn't in tune, but it didn't matter. The crowd roared, not because of the sound, but because of what it meant. It was innocence meeting greatness, and both becoming one. Then Freddie did something the cameras almost missed. He slipped one of his wristbands from his arm, the white one he always wore, and gently placed it around Lily's wrist. "For you, my little champion," he said softly. The crowd couldn't hear his words, but they saw the gesture. A murmur ran through the audience, spreading like a wave of emotion. Brian May wiped his eyes discreetly. Roger Taylor sat motionless behind his drums. They all knew they were witnessing something beyond any performance, a fleeting, sacred connection that no fame could ever create. When the song ended, Freddie didn't rise immediately. He stayed there, still kneeling, one hand over his heart. The audience broke into applause that shook the night sky, thousands of voices merging into a single thunderous "thank you." And though he had sung to millions across the globe, Freddie Mercury would later say, in private, that this was the one performance where he didn't feel like a star at all. He felt human, completely, beautifully human. For a moment no one knew what to do. Tens of thousands stood frozen in awe, their faces glowing in the soft amber light that washed over the stage. And then, like a single breath released from 70,000 hearts, the applause began. It was slow at first, hesitant, emotional. Then it grew, spreading across Wembley like a storm of gratitude. People were crying openly now. Grown men with Queen shirts pressed to their faces, mothers holding their children, couples embracing as the echoes of "Love of My Life" lingered in the air. It was no longer a rock concert. It was something closer to a prayer. Freddie helped Lily wave to the crowd. The little girl giggled, her nerves finally melting away. The massive screens showed her smiling face to the entire stadium, and the roar intensified. Fans began chanting her name, though no one knew it. It was the sound of pure affection. The camera panned to Freddie, and he grinned that wide, radiant grin that had once seemed larger than life. But now, standing beside a child who had wandered into his world, that grin felt different, humble, real, deeply grateful. He wasn't performing anymore. He was simply being. The band joined in the applause. Brian May leaned his guitar against the amp, clapping slowly with tears in his eyes. Roger Taylor gave a soft roll on the snare drum, like a heartbeat keeping time with the moment. Even the crew backstage stood silently, many of them wiping their eyes. It was rare, impossibly rare, for a crowd of that size to be united by something so gentle. Yet Freddie had done it, without spectacle, without pyrotechnics, just by kneeling down and acknowledging a little girl's courage. He had turned an ordinary night into a legend. And as the noise faded into the warm hum of the audience, Freddie leaned toward the microphone again and said, almost whispering, "You see, my darlings, love is the only thing worth breaking the rules for." The crowd erupted once more, the words echoing far beyond the stadium walls. In that single sentence, he summed up the essence of who he was: rebellious, kind, fearless, and impossibly human. It wasn't a rehearsed line. It came from the heart. And that's why people never forgot it. When the lights dimmed and the final echoes of "We Are the Champions" faded into the night, the band left the stage to a thunder of applause. Freddie lingered for a few extra moments, waving, blowing kisses, soaking in the electricity that still hung in the air. But as he walked down the narrow corridor leading backstage, his mind wasn't on the performance or the crowd's roaring love. It was on the little girl in the yellow dress. The image of her smiling face, her trembling hands holding that tiny poster, stayed burned behind his eyes like the afterglow of a dream. In the dressing room, he sat in front of the mirror, removing his crown and wiping away streaks of eyeliner. The usual post-show chatter filled the space. Roadies, moving equipment, laughter from the band, distant echoes of fans still singing outside. But Freddie was unusually quiet. He looked at himself in the mirror, the same reflection the world worshipped, and whispered, "That little angel reminded me why I started." His assistant, Peter Freestone, noticed the tone in his voice and asked softly, "You mean the girl from the stage?" Freddie nodded. "Find her. I want to make sure she gets home safe and give her something to remember tonight." Within an hour, one of the crew located Lily and her father near the exit gates, still overwhelmed by what had happened. They were escorted backstage, where Freddie greeted them without the stage lights, without the larger-than-life persona, just a man in a robe, exhausted and glowing with sincerity. Lily's father tried to apologize for the chaos, but Freddie stopped him immediately, smiling. "Don't apologize, darling. She gave me something tonight that no audience ever could." He handed Lily a small velvet box. Inside was a silver charm bracelet with a lightning bolt, the symbol Freddie sometimes wore on stage. "So you never forget to be brave," he told her. Lily's eyes widened and she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Freddie." He laughed softly. "No, love, it's just Freddie." As they left, Freddie stood by the door watching them disappear into the night. The dressing room lights flickered slightly, and he turned back to the mirror, staring at his reflection one last time before the makeup came off completely. "Love is the only thing worth breaking the rules for," he repeated under his breath, a faint smile tugging at his lips. That night, in the silence after the thunder, Freddie Mercury, the man the world saw as immortal, felt more alive than ever. Decades slipped by. The stages grew quiet, the lights dimmed, and Freddie's voice, that glorious, soaring voice, became an eternal echo in the hearts of millions. But for one woman now in her 30s, that echo wasn't just in records or films. It lived inside her. Lily still kept the silver charm bracelet Freddie had given her that night. The lightning bolt charm had faded with time, its shine dulled by the years, but its meaning never did. Every time she touched it, she could still feel the warmth of his hand, the softness in his voice, the unspoken lesson he gave her: be brave and lead with love. She had grown up surrounded by music, inspired by that unforgettable evening. She studied piano, then voice, always telling her teachers, "I want to sing like the man who knelt for me." Though she never sought fame, her music carried something rare: sincerity. When she performed at small cafes or community events, people often said, "You remind me of someone." She would smile quietly, knowing exactly who they meant. Freddie had given her more than a memory. He had given her a compass, one that pointed her toward kindness and courage, even in life's hardest moments. Years later, Lily was invited to speak on a radio program about the power of music to heal. As the host asked about her biggest inspiration, she took a deep breath. "When I was 7, she said, I ran past security at a Queen concert. I shouldn't have, but I did. And instead of being angry, Freddie Mercury stopped everything. For me, he didn't see a silly little girl. He saw someone who just needed to be seen. That night changed my life." The studio fell silent. Even the host, a hardened journalist, had tears in his eyes. Lily smiled softly. "He taught me that greatness isn't about being loud. It's about listening, even to the smallest voice." That interview went viral. Old fans of Queen shared it across the world. People who had been at Wembley that night wrote in to say they remembered the girl, the moment, the silence before the song. For a brief time, the memory of that evening resurfaced everywhere, and once again, Freddie's name filled the airwaves, not as a rock god, but as a man who showed what humanity could sound like when it sang with love. The story of that night became one of those rare tales that outlived time, whispered among fans, passed through generations, and retold in quiet moments by those who still believed that music could touch something eternal. Photos from the Wembley show resurfaced years later. A blurred image of Freddie kneeling, the faint outline of a little girl in a yellow dress reaching out to him. No one could have known back then how much that image would come to mean. It wasn't just another concert snapshot. It was proof that empathy, even in front of 70,000 screaming fans, could silence the world more powerfully than any song. Journalists later called it the night Freddie Mercury stopped time. But for those who had been there, it was simpler than that. It was the night the world saw the real man behind the legend. Beneath the glitter, the showmanship, and the unshakable confidence, there was a heart that recognized innocence and met it with tenderness. Freddie didn't need to lecture or pose. One quiet act of compassion did what entire speeches never could. And though that moment lasted only minutes, its echo stretched far beyond the applause, into the lives of everyone who witnessed it, and into the countless hearts who would one day hear the story. For Lily, that legacy became her compass through adulthood. Whenever life felt too loud, too cruel, she remembered the warmth in his eyes and the way he'd said, "Be brave." She carried those words into everything she did, her music, her friendships, even her own children. Sometimes, when her daughter asked who the man in the old photograph was, Lily would smile and answer, he was someone who believed kindness was louder than fame. And as her little girl listened to Love of My Life on the record player, the cycle continued, one soul teaching another how to love without boundaries. In the end, Freddie Mercury's truest performance wasn't on the charts or in the spotlight. It was in that small act of humanity that turned a chaotic concert into a timeless memory. That night proved something powerful, that the greatest artists don't just move audiences. They move hearts. They make the world gentler, kinder, more alive. If this story touched your heart, share this video. Tell us in the comments. Do you believe true greatness is measured by compassion? And remember, sometimes a single act of love can echo louder than an entire stadium.